Hi guys, good morning, afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds to see if others are going to join, and then we'll get started quickly. All right, I think we can kick this off. Again, for those who've just joined, welcome to our webinar implementing CPQ, gotchas, and best practices. Before we start, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping messages. You'll all be muted, but you have every opportunity to ask questions in the QA box on your right-hand side. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a recording right after the 1st of July here in the US, so Tuesday the 5th. With that, I'd like to introduce Prodly's Hayley and Cloudwerx Rui, and I'll hand it over to Hayley to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining and welcome. I'm excited to talk CPQ implementation. Today I lead marketing and revenue operations, so the technologist side of me is incredibly passionate about implementing technology and software correctly to empower users, and so I think there's a lot to cover here, and excited to have Rui join from Cloudwerx. Rui, I'll let you say hello.
Cool, thanks Ellie. Great to be here. I'm Rui Fonseca. I head up the Revenue Cloud practice within Cloudwerx. Been in kind of this area already for quite a few, like 7-8 years, since my kind of early days at Steelbrick. So yeah, excited to share a bit of kind of our experiences within this domain, and yeah, good for the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, to get started, we're actually going to start with a poll of the audience that Shannon's going to pull up for us here. And while people answer, I just want to point out this webinar is geared towards people that are, earlier in their implementation, but don't worry, there's plenty of good best practice for those who may be further along. Also some gotchas to look out for, and maybe how to get out of them if you've already run into these things and these issues. So let's see as the polling comes in.
We seem to have a 50-50 split between planning on implementing and already implemented. So let me just close this out.
We'll have something for everybody then. Okay, so before we get into the actual software discussion and implementation discussion, CPQ is a major digital transformation for any business that's adopting this technology. And as such, you're going to want to think about your overall change management process, because the people and process part of change management is often way more difficult than the technology side of it, which can be the easiest part. Rui, what tips do you have for driving engagement and adoption of the solution long term, so that we're not just implementing technology that isn't used?
Yeah, I guess it's always kind of that triangle, like people, process, and technology. So I think from experience, it all depends on also like the maturity level of the customer with regards to Salesforce. If they're kind of just starting with Salesforce, if they're already Salesforce users that are just transitioning into CPQ, and how their current selling process is. So it's a question of kind of discussing that with the customer, understanding where they're what's their situation and how things can be put in place in order to make that kind of a bit easier, because it's quite a change. So I guess then you can assess in terms of like, what do you need to focus more? If you need to focus more on on training, you bring at what point you bring super users into the mix, so that they start getting into the flow of things within during the project life cycle, and then when it actually goes live, they are already fluent in the platform and all the functionality being put in. But I guess always the main recommendation we give is to start as simple as possible, and in order also to kind of get some value to the business as quickly as possible. So not bring all the complexity up front, and just kind of adopt a bit of kind of a land and expand type of approach, which typically works much better in terms of kind of also getting the adoption in, and people start using the system, and being happy with basically with what they are using, and also having them involved in terms of providing feedback and providing suggestions in terms of how the tool can evolve along the time as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a theme throughout today, the start simple and then add layers of complexity or sophistication. The other thing before you jump right into, hands-on keyboard building CPQ, that's important to think through is the people that are involved outside of those who would be hands-on keyboard and building. You need to really align the right resources up front. And I know when Cloudwerx partners with a customer to implement CPQ, you typically involve an executive stakeholder, maybe some sales operations enablement, product experts, and then again, those end users that are ideal super users are also great for testing. Can you expand a bit on kind of what role each of these stakeholder groups play in an implementation project?
Yeah, sure. So from an executive sponsorship point of view, it's someone that kind of shares kind of the vision and the expectations in order of what that project is going to bring to the business, and which is kind of pretty much pushing that agenda within the customer itself, and kind of sponsoring the whole initiative. From a sales point of view, of course, because CPQ is much more on the sales side, so having the involvement of either sales operations in order to advise around kind of processes and can provide all the inputs that we would need in terms of implementing it correctly and aligning to the business needs and requirements, and then enablement in order to help that kind of training and adoption and all that kind of hand holding after go live. And it's also critical. Product experts for sure, because like products and pricing are the core of any CPQ implementation. So you pretty much need to bring those SMEs into the project, so we know and we can understand clearly how that commercial offering is defined, and how can we expose that from a CPQ point of view. And then of course IT and as a kind of typical owner then of the platform itself, and providing that will provide then also the continuous care around the solution, and of course end users, because they will be the final the final people that will be using it on a daily basis. So definitely need to bring them early on, so that we can get all feedback required, but also that will help in terms of testing and can become the advocates of the tool, and that will just make things easier from a go live and roll out point of view.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's tempting to kind of jump straight into, okay, I need sales experts who know the sales process, and I need product experts that know the product, and we'll deal with IT and then testing when it comes to. But I think a lot of CPQ projects get delayed when it's unclear who can have a final answer to a question or know where to go. And I think having that executive sponsor is so critical, because they are often the ones that can kind of break through all the clutter and get answers that are needed, so that you can keep the project moving. When it comes to the actual team who will be implementing the actual configuration of CPQ, a CPQ admin typically within IT, but maybe also sits within sales operations, depending on kind of the hierarchy of the particular company. What are some of the best practices, skill sets that a customer is going to want to make sure that they have when they're going through implementation?
Yeah, so I guess our recommendation is always to have someone that would already be ideally be trained in CPQ upfront, that can kind of be a part of the whole engagement and can follow up in terms of everything that is being put together. So which will make much easier for things in the future, because I think one of the main differences of CPQ is its configuration, as we'll kind of touch on a bit later, is a bit different than the normal kind of Salesforce approach. So it's all very kind of data driven. So I guess here, kind of the knowledge of how kind of CPQ would is set up and is configured, the whole data, the whole object model that supports CPQ is definitely critical in order to, because CPQ is one of those tools that after
Hayley, you still there?
I am. I wasn't sure if you lost me or if I lost you.
I'm afraid
We
we
lose
might have
Rudy?
lost Rui.
Oh no. Well, hopefully he can join us back here shortly. We will do our best to continue on in the meantime. As Rui said, this is, a very complex product that is implemented a little bit differently than, your core Sales Cloud or Service Cloud implementations. There are CPQ certifications that you can earn from Salesforce, and that's always helpful. And I think because of this amount of knowledge that you need to have to implement CPQ, a lot of customers engage a consulting partner to help with that initial implementation and kind of the training as they go so that they can take over, and maintain it longer term, particularly if they don't have someone, already on the team that knows how to manage CPQ or has done it before. So with that, we have another poll. Shannon, if you can tee that up for us. Just curious how many people, whether you are already implemented or considering implementing or just starting, how many used a partner or considered it? So it's looking like we're pretty split again. Oh, nope, yes is taking the lead quickly here.
All
I
right.
think we can probably close this one.
Gotcha.
Yeah. 2/3 used a partner or are planning on using a partner, and a third have not. Rui, have you been able to join us back? There you are. Just in time. No worries.
Wi-Fi.
The life of digital webinars. So our poll informed us that of the audience, 2/3 are planning on using a partner or did use a partner in their implementation, and a third did it on their own. So I will turn it over to you on this one. For those who maybe are on the fence or haven't decided who to go with, what's important to consider when evaluating implementation partners?
Yeah, I think it falls down under kind of these three kind of main areas. Of course, capability is key as well, so that there's a partner involved that are like either kind of Revenue Cloud accredited, that have kind of good credentials and success stories behind kind of implementing kind of a CPQ solution. So that's definitely core. But I guess also it's definitely key in terms of that alignment with the customer itself. So from a cultural fit point of view, so that kind of they will be almost like kind of speaking the same language and pretty much aligned in terms of kind of the way to kind of manage, and so that they'll pretty much get along along the way. So that could be kind of a joint exercise, because in an initiative like this one, you want kind of everyone kind of aligned to the end goal and to the final objective. And with an initiative like this, kind of customer and partner will go kind of hand in hand in order to achieve that. So which kind of leads into that adaptability side of things as well. So each customer has its own needs. Some of them just totally rely on the partner to deliver things end to end. Others already have some capability internally and want the partner to come in and help them with align with their own team in order to deliver that. So I think that flexibility that kind of on the partner side as well, in order to align all of that in terms of what the customer wants to achieve and how they want to achieve it. It's definitely key so that you can kind of hit the ground running from day one.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of practices and varying levels of expertise when it comes to Revenue Cloud. So these are all good things to consider in the decision if you do decide to go with an implementation partner. Okay, let's get into the core domains of CPQ, the nuts and bolts of how this product works for you. So we'll go into each of these in more detail in a minute. I think to set the stage, it's important to understand CPQ is developed iteratively. On the left, we have the fundamental CPQ domains. These are things that are essential for every single implementation, and it's important that you do them in this specific order to be the most successful and to have the less rework. On the right are the secondary domains, and these will apply for some people, all of them, but not for everyone in particular. And when you get to this stage, you can start to do this in any order that you would prefer and even in parallel. There's less dependencies on the secondary domains. Rui, a full implementation might take, several months, 6 months, but that's no reason you can't start delivering some of the functionality to your sales reps and have them start using within the first month or two. Can you explain more about how customers can see faster time to value for their CPQ implementation?
Yeah, I think kind of touched a little bit earlier on that. I think that kind of land and expand approach is always the one that kind of helps kind of bringing value as early as possible to the business. So it's almost like an MVP kind of a approach where, like, upfront, you identify, when talking with the customer, kind of you identify all the pain points that we need to solve, all the requirements that we want to implement, but then you kind of do a prioritization exercise in order to, okay, what is actually needed for day one that we want to ensure that is there for the business to start leveraging, but also aligned in terms of how can we kind of get that value early on. So it's typically it's that prioritization exercise in terms of defining the implementation project into different phases and keep it as simple as possible up front, so you can just start hit the ground running and have kind of sales users using the solution as early as possible, but which will already kind of solve a good bunch of their pain points up front, and then they basically can realize value kind of earlier, and yeah, just start taking the benefits as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and it's really following an agile development methodology when you take a step back and think about it. Within Salesforce and within CPQ in particular, it's this complex iterative development process. There's always room for errors and bugs. Once you've released some functionality to users, you don't want to kind of sour them on CPQ as a solution for them by breaking it early on. So testing super important. Salesforce best practice for development in general, but specifically, especially for CPQ, says start development and building functionality in independent kind of development environments where you're not competing with others' work. Test in an integration environment, maybe do some UAT in a separate environment, and then you release to production. Rui, why is it so important that you really do consider adopting this best practice for development for CPQ?
Yeah, I think like having this type of approach, like a normal kind of DevOps type of approach to things. Of course, it's a best practice from any Salesforce implementation. With CPQ, I think it gets even more important because we are talking about kind of the data element, the data configuration side element of things. And because, for example, like CPQ doesn't provide anything that will allow like kind of versioning or testing things up front. So you need kind of all this structure in place to make sure that you're not changing anything in production already that may impact the user. So you want to make sure that all of those changes are properly going through this through this process and managed as like any other development lifecycle from an implementation point of view. So that's definitely critical in terms of making sure that this any CPQ implementation is also aligned to this type of approach, because anything that you could kind of incorrectly push to production can definitely impact with regards to things like products and pricing, and even down the line of selling something incorrectly to a customer that you shouldn't sell, for example. So it's all preventing errors and in managing and ensuring everything is correct from the start. So yeah, in order to kind of minimize and mitigate all of those risks, it's definitely key to have something like this in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of the day, this is your company's revenue engine. So there's a very low tolerance for mistakes. Definitely, you do not want to have to, go to a customer and say, "I'm sorry, we quoted you the wrong price. We're not able to honor that." Or on the flip side, be told, "We have to honor this, and we're going to lose money on this customer." That's never something you want to be responsible for because you pushed a change and it wasn't fully tested. Which leads us to the second thing, and you've kind of alluded to this before. CPQ, when you're implementing CPQ, you really need to invest in deployment automation to move your changes to production. And you've mentioned configuration data and how CPQ is developed a little differently than other things in Salesforce. Can you explain more about the unique challenges of release management for CPQ?
Yeah. So again, it's configuration data. So pretty much what majority of the CPQ configuration is done with data in regular objects within Salesforce, and the only kind of out of the box way for this to kind of be promoted or kind of go through all that release management process is like through data loader or Excel sheets, where you need to manage almost like an object by object in that way. So you need something in place that allows you to kind of move these kind of data structures properly according to this development kind of life cycle, that ensures that all of that is moved correctly and accurately across the board for each of the environments. And that's pretty much where kind of Prodly comes in and helps on kind of with those challenges and provides that kind of accuracy in terms of managing those releases correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely how we started working together with Cloudwerx, is helping your implementation team automate some of these things that would normally be handled by change sets, but within CPQ is not. So, all right, into the meat and potatoes, the core domains of CPQ. The first and the biggest, most important is your product catalog. There's going to be two big themes throughout all of these domains, but it's especially important with product catalog. The first is, this is your opportunity to rethink everything about how you're currently quoting and selling customers. You are investing in CPQ to digitally transform your business. You are not just trying to rebuild the pricing spreadsheet that your sales reps have been sharing around the sales floor. On the other side of things, you want to keep CPQ, the core build of it, inside the box, so to say. Because these things build on each other, the more you push your product catalog to do something unnatural that it wasn't designed to do in the system to fit every edge case, the harder it's going to be to do every single following domain and implement those. So as we've said many times before, start simple. You don't want to build up and amass a bunch of tech debt from over kind of customization early on. I think one reason, Rui, that people are tempted to go this route is because they're concerned about integrations downstream, particularly ERP systems. You have much more experience with integrations than I do. Do customers really need to design their CPQ to match their ERP or another system they're trying to integrate to?
No, ideally not.
That was easy and simple.
because typically like the view on products from ERP, it's more kind of from a backend view, and on CPQ you want that view to be more a commercial view. So ideally, like in every engagement, typically you go through a kind of a good product kind of rationalization exercise up front, so that you can definitely kind of design and structure your kind of product model in a way that will fit into the way that kind of the customer is selling, and that may not kind of be totally aligned with how kind of that vision is on the ERP side. So then it's more like that's where kind of integration, for example, comes in order to help kind of solve those problems. But yeah, ideally, you shouldn't be kind of having that restriction in terms of how you're going about your product model exercise, constrained in terms of the way that ERP is looking at products.
Mm-hmm. The next domain is product bundles. This is once you figure out what's actually truly a product, uniquely a product, and not just a variation on a product, that's where bundles can come in. You can use these to assign different attributes like colors, for example. What other tips do you have for designing product bundles?
Yeah, like product bundles so definitely they can reflect how customers also kind of typically bundle products together, but not only. Like within CPQ, you typically leverage bundles as well in order to drive like the business rules and the business logic that you want to implement. So that's definitely useful in order to kind of make sure that you're like whatever the user is configuring is accurate, and also like what that configuration element is also making their lives easier, because through the rules you can automatically kind of do things like not showing options that they shouldn't be selling in that specific situation based on attributes, based on compatibility with other products, etc. So the bundling capability can definitely help on driving that in a much easier way from a user experience point of view. So that's definitely kind of bundling is definitely a key feature that typically we can leverage in order to kind of deliver those requirements and those specific business rules that customers want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. These are definitely more powerful than just like packages that you would offer to a customer. I think it's also important to be aware this is how your sales team will be presented with their options for selling value and selling a whole solution. So you don't want to throw the entire kitchen sink into a bundle. You want to limit it to what they truly need to help them sell more effectively. Yep. All right, our third domain is pricing strategy. This sets the starting price of your products, the price that you're going to suggest to sales as the first price, but it also can help you when we get to the next domain, which is approvals. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we get there. How should people approach the pricing domain?
I think it's one of those that also start simple and then kind of work from there. I guess the pricing capabilities allow kind of to bring a lot of kind of logic into it, that you can make things kind of easier from a user point of view, that you can control things like either like how the pricing gets applied, if it's just a kind of a static scenario, or if it's a more kind of dynamic type of way of calculating the pricing, which would facilitate that from a user point of view. But also when we think about discounting, for example, you can already bring kind of a lot of rules in place that you can control, and you can already start providing a bit of governance there. That then is kind of replicated across the organization, and kind of making sure that everyone who's using the tool is pretty much kind of pricing the same way and through the same rules, and there's quite a lot of kind of consistency and governance there.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So that is our first three, the fundamental CPQ domains. So quick reminder from here, we're going to go into the secondary domains. These can be done in any order and in parallel, and some of them may not apply to you. It should be pretty apparent when we get to those that don't apply. So approvals, the great thing about if you've really taken the time to go through the first three domains and simplify your business processes, you've got a huge head start on the approval process. So as you mentioned, discounting is something you can control within the pricing strategy. So a lot of the pricing strategy can make approvals that were necessary before you had CPQ kind of redundant or completely unnecessary. Can you give us some other examples of where that could apply?
Yep, like approvals will definitely kind of bring that governance element, right? So, and depending on organizations, there's kind of some very kind of simple approaches, which is pretty much based on kind of what's the amount of discount that is being provided to the customer, or a much more elaborate approval process. So there you kind of have the options of kind of either leveraging standard approvals, which is pretty much the standard Salesforce process from an approvals perspective, or you could, if you're leveraging CPQ plus, it comes with an advanced approvals module, which kind of allows for a more kind of complex scenarios that either you have kind of very many kind of streams in parallel approving a specific deal that you need to kind of take into consideration, and usually it's like goes beyond the sales organization itself, and it could go to, for example, like legal, to product management, etc. So this provides that kind of level of automation that you can bring into the picture. But also, I think this is another area that yeah, you can bring all this control, but also like when you're starting with something brand new as CPQ, if you don't had like an implemented approval process in place, is also an area that you should kind of start small and start simple, just necessary to provide that additional governance capability, and then build up from that, because we've seen some cases where adoption was highly impacted in terms of because of very complex approval cases, which led to some kind of frustration from users. So success in terms of adoption is always kind of obtained with a bit more kind of flexibility initially, and then kind of start building from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're implementing CPQ to allow your sellers to quote faster and close business faster. You don't want to slow them down with unnecessary approvals, and it's good to remind, that the broader stakeholder group, CPQ won't allow incorrect product configuration. If you're setting things up, it won't allow them to go around the rules. So a lot of those kind of double check the quote before it goes out, and that maybe needed to happen prior don't need to happen now. My final fun tip for this domain is don't underestimate the kind of psychological effect that approvals can have, and using that to your advantage. Within the quote line editor, you can actually display messages or even images to show reps the level of approval that particular quote configuration will need. And depending on how arduous that will be for them, they may, try to sell more aligned to the way you want them to be selling. So that's always something you can leverage as well. All right, quote templates. As a marketer, this is probably my favorite domain. This is, my chance as a marketing function to rein in those ugly quotes that our sales reps are sending out sometimes. And this is also one of the domains that people have the most opinions about. So my personal advice on that matter is design is subjective. I have to have this discussion a lot as a marketer. You may not like this color, but it might be the best thing for this objective we're trying to achieve. So keep the cooks in the kitchen to a minimum if you can, and try to separate the decisions of what needs to be included on the quote in terms of the information that the customer actually needs separate from, how do we want this to be laid out? What font do we want to use? What color? If you can keep those decisions separate, it should be a bit easier to get that final approval for the quote document that you're going to be sending. Other tips that you have, Rui, for navigating quote template design?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's all about like thinking about the customer experience, like what will be their kind of reaction in terms of getting that document from the organization, and so that it will be kind of, the document will contain clearly what they are actually kind of buying, how much it will cost, all the kind of terms and conditions that they're agreeing to. But like, so it needs to be like consistent, clear, but also not overly complex. So which will then kind of be much easier for customers to understand. Things like language is typically for organizations who sell to a lot of different geographies is definitely something that should be kind of considered, and then you can leverage kind of capabilities like the dynamic kind of templates where you can manage content dynamically based on a specific series of criteria and data points. That can help in terms of building those and generating those documents in a much efficient way, which will be kind of a very good from a customer experience perspective.
Mm-hmm. All right, hot topic in CPQ is guided selling. This is a feature that will pop up kind of a flow almost for users to go through. I know many people actually recommend not using the feature and using other features within CPQ to create that guided selling experience for your reps without having them locked into that flow. What's your take on that, Rui?
It usually depends on the catalog itself. So if it's a very extensive catalog, definitely something that could be useful. Depends on the proficiency of the sales team as well in terms of knowing what their own catalog and can they find the products that they need to match what the customer requires. So it's almost like a case by case in terms of how, considering kind of the user, like what the customer wants to achieve in how to deliver that. So we always know that kind of guided selling, that capability is there. We can leverage, but as you said, there's other ways of kind of managing the way to kind of get to the products that you need. So it's a case by case scenario that you can typically determine, do we really need it? It's all about how the user experience would be. So if it will improve the user experience and will make life easier for who's using the tool, definitely. If it's just bringing, like if it's just a step which is not very valuable for them, yeah, maybe not using it. So
I think considering your sales process here is important too. Guided selling is really great if you're building a quote kind of in real time with the customer, because it's formatted as kind of a question prompt, so you can be having that conversation as you're building the quote with the customer. But if your sales process relies on a lot of discovery well in advance of needing a quote, you're collecting all that information, and ideally your reps are storing that on the account and the opportunity in the quote record, and that information can be actually used to dynamically automate what the product selection the rep sees when they actually go to configure that quote. So it's maybe redundant or unnecessary there, and encourages better data capture earlier on in your sales process, which I'm always a fan of. All right, renewals and approvals, or sorry, that should say amendments. My proofreading failed me. Renewals and amendments are one of those things that's really great for recurring businesses where, this is where Salesforce CPQ from a CPQ product perspective really stands out. Obviously not applicable to businesses that are not selling recurring products or services. And as you go through the earlier domains, your product catalog, you'll probably have figured out what products can renew, what would potentially need to be amended. the big question here is, how will you manage renewals and amendments when it relates to quotes and opportunities, and what do customers need to consider, Rui?
Yeah, it's definitely key, and one of the kind of big functionalities that CPQ provides, especially if you're selling on a recurring model. Like amendments are critical to manage in-flight changes when customer is already within a specific contract, and renewals in order to continue the customer, kind of continue to keep the customer. So it's definitely areas that are key to be considered, because the way you're handling a new sale may not be the same way that you handle an amendment, also, so an in-flight change to an existing contract, and the same with renewal. So it's definitely key to get a good understanding in terms of how kind of all those two how those processes are managed from a business point of view, that you can kind of bring into the configuration, into the logic, in order to manage that appropriately. So with renewals, for example, like when because renewals definitely impact forecasts, the business forecasts. So when do you create them? When do you trigger kind of the opportunity, the renewal opportunity creation, so that you can already start looking into how that will impact your business forecast, and basically when should sales reps start working on them in order to start negotiating with their own customers in terms of how are they going to keep that customer kind of loyal into the organization. So yeah, these two scenarios are critical and are very kind of an essential part to any successful implementation. And again, especially with an organization that will sell on a recurring basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that being one of those types of businesses, and we rely on CPQ. Of course, it is super powerful to be able to have my forecast for next year, next quarter, whatever it is, and have those renewals and amendments just automatically factor in. So I know not only what am I bringing in from a new business side, but what am I expecting to renew, and where am I expecting to grow those customers. The last domain is order management, and like renewals and amendments, this isn't going to apply to everyone. This is really for customers who either physically fulfill products or need to provision products in some way once they've been sold. It's super powerful. What do customers need to think about when it comes to using orders?
Yeah, so orders are like the next step to a finalized sale, right? So as you mentioned earlier, is when like a customer actually needs to fulfill or provision those products to the customer. So are definitely key to kind of initiate those processes as well. So for example, like typically when we have an engagement where you need to hand over kind of that finalized sale to kind of a provisioning system or fulfillment platform, that's order is typically the handover point through integration to those systems. So it's where you're actually kind of tracking your bookings against on the things that were sold, and then you can also use them to manage things like kind of adjusting start dates of subscriptions, or start dates of kind of the fulfillment and the delivery of those products to the customer. So definitely key from an end-to-end process, and it needs to be kind of, it's a key element if we are thinking in terms of integrating then kind of Salesforce with other external systems in order to trigger like fulfillment, provisioning, and even billing as well.
Yeah, this is kind of the main integration point for Salesforce billing if you do decide to add that on to your CPQ implementation. All right, that brings us to our last question topic. What comes after the initial implementation? At some point, you're going to go live and you'll have worked your way through the applicable 8 core domains of CPQ, and you'll be in kind of maintenance mode. So knowing that CPQ is this living, breathing software application, the more prepared you are to manage it long-term, I think the better you'll be. Some tips from Prodly when we think about applying kind of best practices for Agile development and DevOps solutions. This is your pricing engine. This is where you're keeping pretty critical pricing data. So data governance is incredibly important to think through in terms of how do you move data between these environments, who has access to do that, how do you keep that data secure. If you have strict compliance regulations, this is super, super important so that you can track the changes to your pricing information and track back how did you go from one price to another price for a customer. The second kind of tip or best practice is, in addition to deployment automation, you can actually integrate CPQ to a source control and do source-driven development. Prodly offers an integration to several major Git repositories to configure this for you, and that allows you to just accelerate that innovation and accelerate the pace at which you can change and update and maintain CPQ while being, adding another layer of kind of risk mitigation, which is always great, given the impact that some of these mistakes could have to your, your sales team and your customers. And then the final is, regression testing. So when you're going through an implementation, you're having sign-offs, you're checking, we delivered this feature, is it built, that unit test, is it built to spec? You can actually turn those into regression tests cases with Prodly to make sure that as you're continuing to update things, you're not introducing changes that maybe broke something that was working before, because you don't want your salespeople or your customers, worst case scenario, to find this. So kind of think of it like a smoke alarm for bad quotes or bad contracts. Rui, what else do people need to consider when they make this transition from, implementation initially to, post go live state?
Yeah, it's definitely key to think about how you're going to kind of take care of your kind of CPQ solution. Like going live is just the first step of that process. And as you mentioned, this is a tool that delivers kind of business outcomes, and it's totally reliant on kind of products, pricing, and all the kind of the business rules that you're putting around governing your sales process. So those are all things that will continue changing along the way. So you need to have kind of either a team structure in place, either internally or through a partner, depending on like whatever scenario, but and the tools in place to help manage that. So that's definitely key, that you have that clear kind of ownership from a business and from a team point of view, who is responsible for either maintaining but then also all those considerations around testing and making sure that like we are not kind of bringing any issues or errors into the live system. But then you also have like the tools that help supporting that. So yeah, definitely that's key.
Awesome. So we do have some time left for questions. I will pause on our last slide here, give people a chance to enter any questions that you have in the question, or raise your hand and we can take you off of mute. We do have a couple of next steps if you are struggling either with implementation or with kind of the release management side of making an implementation be successful. Rui, I'll let you go first. If you want to give more context around what a scoping call entails and what a customer would potentially get out of that.
Yeah, so I think discovery is definitely something critical for an implementation, for a CPQ implementation, and that's like that scoping call is always what we want to achieve within that scoping call. That's always what we want to achieve, is to understand better like what's the use case or the main pain points that customer wants to address, and already start understanding a bit more in terms of the product model and pricing and all these domains that we touched on a little bit, so that we can provide what will be kind of our recommended approach for the customer to address that, and to provide kind of a clear a clear initial view in terms of what would a typical CPQ implementation entail, and then pretty much kind of go from there. So I think our aim is to make sure that we kind of estimate things properly and correctly upfront, which then will make the whole implementation cycle much easier and definitely successful.
Mm-hmm. And on the Prodly side, if you are interested in seeing how we can help you both set up the development environments where you're going to be working with, keep them in sync with production, automate some of those deployments like as easily as you would with change sets, but for that specific CPQ configuration data, we would be more than happy to give you a personalized demo. There's a link where you can sign up for it, or just respond to the follow-up email that we send out for either Cloudwerx or for Prodly. We will pass along the information. Shannon, have we had any questions come in?
Oh, hi, I'm back.
Hello again.
Hello. There is one. Joe, who's asking or saying we're considering CPQ because it is point to click and it's easy for admin to manage. Would there still be a developer necessary to manage any releases?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Rui, if you don't mind, I'll start, and then if you have additional ideas. What is necessary for deploying CPQ is a strong knowledge of your object model, or a deployment tool like Prodly, and that's where I think we have some capability so that you can keep it without having to have somebody like very technically aware of CPQ and the different object relationships, the order of operations in which you have to upload, upsert those records, how to do that in a way that doesn't create duplicates, because you don't want multiple duplicates of critical things like price rules and product rules and discount schedules. So that is kind of where Prodly got started, was to solve that, because we don't think you should need a developer or an architect to be able to do this successfully. You should be able to do it through a point-and-click UI that we provide. Rui, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, like it's typical, like for the majority of the kind of changes that could be done don't actually need a developer, just because of the nature how CPQ configuration happens. Of course, for example, like we see sometimes customers giving the ability, for example, to the business in order to do changes around products and pricing information, which are typically the ones that kind of change more often and don't have like an impact in terms of the whole kind of business rules and the whole process. So those are safer to be adjusted. But even with doing some configuration changes on things that could, like for example, like adjusting an approval criteria or adjusting a specific product rule that's delivering some type of logic. As you said, Hayley, it's a question of having that kind of functional knowledge and that data model understanding around CPQ, and then like leveraging a tool like Prodly that you can safely then make sure that what you're deploying into production is like it's valid and is not causing any issues or any errors to what's in place.
Mm-hmm. I think, Shannon, I saw someone raise their hand. I don't know if you caught who that was.
Yes, it was, and she actually posted the question, Brandy, who asks if Prodly only migrates data or does it also migrate metadata? She's familiar with using Capado Essentials for this purpose, but interested in what Prodly has to offer.
Mm-hmm. No, we offer both. There's maybe 10 very specific, more obscure metadata types that we don't currently support, but it's really edge case stuff. So you can absolutely use Prodly to migrate both data and metadata. We can solve your release challenges across the board.
Definitely.
Yes, Rui, you've seen it in action.
Like we use Prodly in any of our kind of Revenue Cloud engagements, and even beyond that. So yeah, like that can definitely like we are heavy users of Prodly and for a long time, so can definitely vouch for kind of the capabilities there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that point, we're not limited to just CPQ data either. If there's, you know, test data that you want to make sure that you're always including in a sandbox for development, we got you there too. Other applications, field service is a big one that's got a lot of configuration data. Financial Force has a ton of it, Velocity, so we can support you across your entire Salesforce tech stack. Any other questions out there, Shannon?
Not that I can see, no.
All right, we'll give it a minute. If you'd prefer not to type it out, you can always raise your hand. I can take you off mute. Well, Rui, I want to thank you again for joining us today for this webinar and sharing all your very detailed expertise. I hope everybody has learned something about implementing CPQ and is feeling confident and empowered with the best practices we were able to share today to implement this and go live and maintain it long-term successfully for your business.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. Thanks, Shannon. It was a really good session. So yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll go ahead. Shannon, you want to close this out here?
Yes. All right.